All right. Hey, Cedar Valley. My last teaching here, and I thought it started at least with this title slide, which is kind of fun. Play on words. This present future is not your past. Stay with me. The people of Israel had miraculously escaped captivity in Egypt, and by captivity I mean enslavement. Then Egyptian leaders had forgotten about Joseph's salvation of their people. So far down the road, historically speaking, they saw in the people of Israel cheap and abundant labor who actually might turn on them or just leave them altogether. They didn't see the family line of the one who saved them from starvation through 7 years of drought so many years before that. They were brutal. Pharaoh ordered every Egyptian to make the Israelites their slaves, to treat them cruelly, to work them hard. Crazy long hours on farms, crazy long hours of carrying bricks for building. Then they were forced to make the bricks they were carrying. Then they were forced to gather the straw to make the bricks that they were carrying. And when they couldn't make or carry as many bricks as they used to, their masters just beat them senseless and said they were just lazy. A series of plagues later, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, let the people of Israel go for a weekend worship retreat, but the signs were telling the people, included women and children. They took their flocks and herds. Even their Egyptian masters gave them gold and silver as the people of Israel were making their way out. So Pharaoh changed his mind. He sent his cavalry after them, hundreds of soldiers on horse, to chase down and bring back a bunch of brick makers and layers and farmers and their wives and children and livestock, because that's a fair fight, right? Moses parts the Red Sea for a dry land getaway. The cavalry pursues them, and horses and men are drowned when the walls of water break down and crash upon them. God saves the people of Israel. And so Moses and Miriam, they write a song about this miraculous escape that begins with these lines in Exodus chapter 15. Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. And sing it they did, my friends. Miriam took a tambourine in her hand. This is verse 20 now. And all the women followed her with tambourines and dancing. And then it begins. Like, this is really weird. The complaining and the grumbling. They complained. Like, what are we supposed to drink? Exodus 15, verse 24. So Moses asked God what to do. So God said, well, let's throw a piece of water into this nearby really bitter pool of water so that it will be drinkable. And voila, they had water in the middle of the desert. They grumbled. This is chapter 16 of Exodus, verse 3. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. Like there, we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you, speaking of Moses, you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Really? So God sent them meat, quail, in the evening, and bread, manna, in the morning. And voila, they had food. But this hardly stopped the complaining and the grumbling. So what did Moses do? Did he join them in their reminiscing about the good old days back in Egypt? Did he take them back to Egypt? No. As the story goes, Moses remembered what God had done with them and for them in the song he co-wrote with Aaron's sister, his partner in ministry, her name being Miriam. Moses organized the people of Israel to build and furnish the tabernacle that portable meeting place with God, and Moses defended the people of Israel to God when God fairly burned with anger against them for making an idol of gold in the shape of a calf that would lead them. Like, this was the very first thing they agreed not to do in their agreement with God. So God was right to call them a stiff-necked people, which is to say, a stubborn, hard-to-lead bunch. And didn't Moses know that? But he defended them anyway by appealing to God to keep his promise, the one that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, also known as Israel, to make their descendants as numerous as the stars. And then Moses led them into the future to the land of Canaan. Why does this story matter? Why am I telling it to you? Because even though the circumstances of the people of Israel at that time were quite different than ours in this time, it's partly, if not mostly, a story about attitude. I think the story of the people of Israel coming out of the Exodus then has some important things to tell us about the past, present, and future of Cedar Valley Church, such as put the past in perspective. Cedar Valley Church has much to remember about what God has done with and for you. Now, I'm hesitant to write a lyric for a song of remembrance, as Moses and Miriam did for the people of Israel, because I think you, Cedar Valley, would have great verses that I will miss. I know you do, actually. And better ways, maybe even of saying such things. And I'm even more hesitant to sing it, but let me remind you, this would be some of the lyric in a song for Cedar Valley. Cedar Valley Mennonite Church, born in 1940, founded by those who made their own escape from the Ukraine to Canada. God worked with you and gave you your first meeting place, a small one-room building, but that you overgrew. Working with John Friesen, God gave you the Cedar Valley Road property. Building began in 1951. Volunteer labor, no debt, built in stages, basement first, sanctuary second, all done in 1953. More growth, more renos. A move from German-speaking to English-speaking ministry. More growth, new building, all done in 1979. God's gift to you to meet for worship, to offer as a gift in service of the people of mission, to disciple old and new followers of Jesus. Cedar Valley Children's Center, wild youth nights, massive choir, a place and a people of belonging. Walk through Bethlehem, Christmas Eve, Good Friday, Easter, worship, 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 weddings and funerals and block parties, people coming and you going, being the church in your homes, at work, in your neighborhoods, in your city, all over the world. Halloween outreach, Mission City's summer market, Reverse Advent calendar, Operation Christmas Child, Seeds of Hope Ministry, Light of the World Christian School. Sing to the Lord, for He is highly exalted. He has given you refuge and purpose and success in ministry, and sends you into your city to sing this song and songs like it, with or without tambourines and dancing, your call. There are so many good things to remember and sing about and thank God for, but not everything was good, right? There isn't a church people on the planet where it's been good all the time, all the way through. Like, we're human. Here's the problem. The past has a power that the future lacks, and that is the power of nostalgia. Nostalgia has the power to make the good things of our past feel better than they might have been, and the bad things of our past seem not as bad as we remember. So said the Israelites. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you, Moses, have brought us out in the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So we say, if only we could go back to the good old days before the pandemic. Were they that good? Yes, much of it was, as my little song says. But Cedar Valley Church has been on a steady numerical decline for more than a decade, and it has lost an entire generation. And we should ask why. And that would be a good question. A question that I would carefully answer with two of my own questions, as I would ask of any churches in decline. The first of them is this: have you gravitated towards personal comfort? If only we had a choir again. If only we sang hymns again. If only people would come to us again. Or have you gravitated away from reaching out to others? The world has changed around us. There was a time when it was cultural to belong to a church. But since this new millennia, the Western world has turned suspicious and critical of the Christian church. What with the church's moral failures and stifling, borderline abusive moral legalism, and the ramping up of the rhetoric of tolerance and secular spirituality in the culture, the gap between the church and the world around us is ever widening. But the church, for the most part, continues to do what was successful in the past because it's what we know. And hey, it worked then, so why not now? Because now is not then. As my friend John says, the path to the future of the church is not through its past. Or as I've said here in my title slide, this present future is not your past. So we have to ask, has Cedar Valley Church been a church relevant for its time? I think we would agree the gospel doesn't change, but how we share it with others needs to change with the changing times, right? Again, because I've said this before, we can be indifferent to the culture, we can be afraid of the culture, or be judgmental of the culture, but none of these postures are particularly effective ways to reach out to people. But loving our neighbor is effective. And not just loving our neighbor through the church by inviting them to unfamiliar events in our comfortable space filled with people who are strangers to them. Remember, Sunday morning worship feels good to us because it's comfortable. It is, however, a series of disconnections for unchurched people, wandering, semi-unrelated or totally unrelated announcements, religious language, a time of group karaoke, and a 30-minute lecture from a book they don't own and they don't know. Loving our neighbor is also very personal. It is listening to them. It is empathizing with them. It is praying for them. It is asking questions and sharing stories of hope. It is, in the end, telling them about Jesus, how he changed the world, how he changed the church, and how he changed you. It's not very comfortable sometimes, but it is part of a healthy pathway of discipleship. The problem with many churches is that they spend way too much time trying to keep people from leaving the church and not enough time reaching out to those who are lost. Think about it. If you counted all the people who belong to Christian churches in the city of Mission, would they outnumber those who are engaged in church? No. Let's say roughly 10% of the population of Mission belongs to a church in the city. That would leave a whopping 90% of the population who don't. Why then do most churches in decline spend 90% of their efforts on 10% of the population? Doesn't that seem a little bit upside down? So here's a tough question. Are you a stubborn, hard to lead people? Are you, to borrow the phrase from Exodus 32, a stiff-necked people? Well, I'm not, you might say, but so-and-so is for sure. Not so fast. Let me ask you, how do you respond to the decisions made by the leadership team of the church? Do you complain and grumble about them because you don't agree with them? Do you talk to other people about them, but not actually anybody on the leadership team? Do you make assumptions and send critical or maybe even slightly patronizing emails, what you might defend as just trying to be helpful? Do you withhold your offering when you disagree with something? If you answered yes to any or all of the following, you might just be stiff-necked. The leadership team has made itself available for your feedback and questions. Give it to them graciously and ask them questions thoughtfully. It was not stiff-necked when Val Gertzen got up at a congregational meeting almost 2 years ago and said, if the leadership team is recommending that we hire a transitional pastor, then we should hire a transitional pastor. They are our leaders, after all. It wasn't blind faith either. It was support. It was trust. Will you follow your leadership team now into your future? Which leads me to my second and last point. Turn your attention to it. Turn your attention to the future. Moses did not reminisce about the good old days back in Egypt, and he did not allow the complaining and grumbling of the people of Israel to change his mind. Yes, he remembered what God had done with and for them, but he didn't take them back to where they were. He looked to the future, to the land of Canaan. Similarly, God has led Cedar Valley Church through a transition season made tougher by a worldwide pandemic. You are positioned for your future. You have new mission, vision, and value statements, reminding you of why you exist and how you will go about your purpose as a church. Your transition and leadership teams have worked hard to update your governance model, constitution, and supporting bylaws, which will allow them to make decisions, your leadership team, more efficiently and more effectively. And your transition and leadership teams have worked hard to put together staffing profiles that make the most sense to them for your future. Stay tuned for more information on those in early January. So the questions remain, are you ready for your future? The transition and leadership teams invite you to join them in sharing the gift of God that is your church campus as a gift in service of the people of mission. This is your vision based upon one of your core strengths as a church, which is the property that was given to you years ago, and based upon the need in your community for spaces to meet. The last question then is, how will you participate? Because the joy of the stories that come out of sharing the campus aren't meant just for the pastors. They're meant for the whole church. A support group participant reaching out to the church to host a memorial here at the church. A support group leader wondering about shutting it down because of small numbers. 1 week, only 2 people showing up, praying about it. 8 people showing up the next week. A new United Way worker hosting a sit-down, get-to-know-each-other greeting of Punjabi men and women new to our neighborhood, grateful for the space to connect. God has brought all these beautiful people to us to the church? Will you join your pastors and leaders, or will you be stiff-necked? Will you join your pastors and leaders, or will you tell yourself, you're too old, you're too young, you're too busy? Will you join your pastors and leaders, or will you let them have all the fun? Will you join a group of people who could form what some might call the campus outreach team, to host these folks, to pray for them, to provide security, whatever it is that you would decide to do? Will you engage in your own vision? Last Sunday, you thanked me for being your transitional pastor. This Sunday, let me thank you. Thank you for inviting me into your community of faith. Thank you. Thank you for your prayers and your support. Thank you for participating as best as you could in the transition process through a pandemic. Thanks for your kind gift of time away for me and Jackie at the Harrison Hot Springs Resort. And thanks for the after-church lunch. I do love me some good fried chicken. Thanks to the transition team. Paige, Elliot, Katie Pankratz, Leslie Miller, Brad Unger, Michelle Elliott, Margaret Dobson, Hank Neufeld, and Vic Dirksen. It was a joy getting to know you and a pleasure to work with you. It was an intense 12 months. You worked hard and we got lots done. Well done. Thanks to the leadership team. Brad Unger, Justin Pankratz, Gail Dirksen, Pam Drockel, Michelle Elliott, and Cheryl Dick. And newly added, Chad Riggins. We've logged a lot of time together. You led through a very difficult season, not just through the transition, but through an ongoing worldwide pandemic. I appreciate you. I respect you. I trust you. You're such a fantastic collection of people representing your church. You have and will make some very tough decisions. I am proud of you, and I can't wait to see where the Lord will lead you as you lead the church. Just keep going. Thanks to Pastors Doug and Grant. There are no two people at Cedar Valley Church who I've spent more time with in this last 22 months. Thanks for praying with me. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with me. Thanks for working with me. Thanks for being honest and vulnerable and laughing with me. You are both such good men. It was good to get to know you. Blessings on both of you. Finally, let me thank you for this, for the chance to preach. It is a gift you have given me, the time to study the Word of God and the chance to share my thoughts with you about what I think our God might be saying to us. It is a sacred trust that is humbling, and I am grateful for it. Let me pray. Father, you tell us that you will continue to work on us individually and as a church. You have brought us through 22 months of straining through a pandemic and navigating conversations around transition of ministry here in our church. I believe that you've led us very clearly with new mission, vision, and values statements, new ways of governing and caring for each other and making decisions, and leaders that the church will call to lead. I pray that Cedar Valley Church would seize its future and know that you are already there, and know that you will work with them to get there. That this present future cannot go through the past. That it has to look different, honoring the past, but being relevant for right now. May the church, may Cedar Valley have the courage to step into its future. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.